Does anyone have a problem with starting now? All right, we're starting now. My name is Will Noveck. I am the founder and I guess the head of Nola LSAT Tutors. I have been a law school admissions consultant and LSAT tutor in New Orleans for the last 12 years. And obviously we are talking about law school admissions today. If you do not want to talk about law school admissions, this is the wrong room to be in. That's what we are talking about. I would highly encourage all of you to take notes. I will not be offended if you don't. If you want to not take notes, I'll be fine. But I would recommend it because I'm going to be spitting a lot of fire and this will not be on the internet for like another year, so I would take the notes. I have a tendency to speak way too fast. If I go fast, please just interrupt me. I'm doing this for y'all. Nola LSAT Tutors has way too many clients. We have way too many clients we do not want anymore. This is not an opportunity to advertise my services. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. Law school admissions, so I'm trying to think of how to explain this. Okay. Law school admissions is insanely competitive. It is one of the most competitive things you'll ever do. It's also the case that 90% of people are doing it wrong. So if you just do it right, you can completely crush it. So besides LSAT and like editing statements, I offer like all admission stuff for free because I can like talk to someone for an hour and like turn a disaster into a good situation. So if any of you ever want, if any of you just ever need advice with law school admissions, just Google us, like reach out, send an email. I will talk to you for free. Okay, so I want to kind of explain, because I just talked about this. I said a minute ago that it's insanely competitive, but everyone is doing it wrong, which I mean. There are people going to T14 programs, going to Ivy League schools, people with full ride scholarships who, for the most part, completely screwed up their admissions and could have done better. It is really a thing. You'll see what I mean as we get into it. But, so there's a few things. First off, a lot of people are getting advice from successful attorneys. This is, in terms of law school admissions, this is like getting advice from this is like getting medical advice from a healthy person. I have like never been sick before. I don't know how to cure cancer. There's like a similar dynamic here. Like being a successful attorney does not mean you know anything about law school admissions. There's also a lot of people who did one thing right and then they tell you everything they did, and a lot of those other things either didn't help or were counterproductive. And then finally, and this is the case with all types of advice, there's not really, like people make these sort of one-size-fits-all declarations, and everyone's case is individual. Everyone has a different situation. There are people I talk to where I'm like, you are moving way too fast, you need to slow the hell down. And then there are other people I talk to and I'm like, you need to like get your shit together and like move way faster. There are people who are worrying too much. There's people who are not worrying enough. And like I'm constantly saying the opposite of what I said to one person to someone else. So like going on the internet and saying you should do this for law school admissions, anyone who sort of handles it that way, that is already in what I would say is very suspect, because it's nothing like that. Okay, I'm gonna get into what I would be thinking about in terms of law school admissions, and I'm gonna go in chronological order, to start with at least. The very first thing I wanna talk about is you really have to break the mentality of focusing on law school rankings, or let me change that. You have to understand what rankings represent and what they don't represent. Rankings are extremely good indicators of how competitive a particular school's admissions process is. A school that is ranked 10th is way more difficult to get admissions or a scholarship to than a school that's ranked 50th, which is going to be way more difficult than like 100, which is going to be more difficult than 150. So rankings are very good if you are thinking how hard is it to get in, how hard is it to get a scholarship. That is not necessarily related to how good the school is at job placement. This is like, if you actually look at the job placement numbers, which by the way, every law school's placement numbers are available online for free. I am just going to repeat this. Every law school's job placement numbers are available online for free. And if you want to go in a deep dive in this, you will discover they do not match the rankings. I don't know because I haven't updated this, but 2 years ago, University of Minnesota was 18th in the country in terms of like US News rankings. It was 120th in terms of job outcomes. It had nearly identical job outcomes to Loyola, which was like 146th. That is wild. Imagine being good enough to get into a top 20 law school and then like going to a law school with outcomes equivalent to like 150. So the very first thing I would say is you have to understand rankings are about admissions competitiveness, not about how good the job placement is. Next thing is that it can even be hard, even if you're looking at numbers for job placement, even that it can be really complicated to tell what's going on. So Tulane has, I would say like insanely good results in like Houston, New York, and pretty good results in New Orleans, and it doesn't really anywhere else. So like if you are interested in practicing law in New York, like Tulane is one of the best schools in the country you can go to. If you're interested in practicing law in South Carolina, it's not a good choice. So there's like additionally in terms of employment outcomes, you also have to look at where the graduates go because that tends to tell you things about where this school is sending people. Finally, it really depends on what you are trying to do with your law degree. There are a lot of fields of law where it just does not matter at all. Every year, I like have people who email me who they're like, I want a 170. And I'm like, what are you trying to do? And they're like, I want to be a criminal defense attorney. And I'm gonna tell y'all, if you want to be a criminal defense attorney, you go to any law school in the country. You do not need a 170. You do not need a good personal statement. You do not need to do a great job on your application. Like, that is a field where it's fairly easy to get a job. At the same time, there's literally 17 law schools in the country that you can go to if you have any hope of practicing environmental law. And every law school in the country has dozens of people who think they're going to do environmental defense work, and they just don't know the fact that there's only 17 schools you can go to do that. So this gets me into my next point, which is, and this is a perfect example of everyone doing it wrong. The advice, if you go on the internet, is don't think about what you want to do with your law degree. Don't go to law school, like get some exposure, figure it out then. That is horrible advice. What you want to do with your law degree determines where you need to go to law school. You need to have figured that out before you apply to law school. There's a few reasons for this. Besides the fact that obviously certain types of degrees certain types of like jobs require going to certain types of schools, like the admissions processes are very different. So like Tulane, the personal statement is incredibly important. If anyone in this room, if I was working with you and you were like, my dream is Tulane, we gotta like dedicate our lives to your personal statement because that's gonna be the difference maker. All right, now, Loyola. Loyola has claimed publicly on numerous occasions that they read the personal statement. Personally, I do not believe this. I have not seen any evidence, and in fact, it really seems like they do not. And that's, by the way, that's normal for schools outside the top 100. So like, this is kind of my point. Your whole process looks different depending on what it is you need to do. That's one part of it. I want to tell another story just to kind of give you a sense of how critical it is to know what you want to do before you go to law school. So for a lot of fields of law, a critical way to get into them is like that internship or clerkship you take after your 1L year. That clerkship, you're like applying for it with your fall semester grade. So you like get whatever grade you get in the fall, and then you apply for the clerkship. And obviously you want to get good grades. I was first in my class after my first semester. There's a reason for that, by the way. We'll get into that in a minute. But I was first in my class after my first semester, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. Spoiler alert, I don't want to practice law. That's why I'm doing this. But I mean, I had absolutely no idea. So I took an internship with the district attorney, which like the only thing I learned from it was I have no interest in criminal law. And it's like I had the golden ticket. I could have done anything. I like literally looked better than everyone else because I was like ranked first in my class. And like that could be you. You can be throwing away the golden ticket, or you could like already know what you want to do. I will tell you that the most successful person I went to law school with was, I'm going to be blunt, not very smart, not kind of a hard worker, not a good student, like C's all through law school, but he walked in on day one and he knew what he wanted to do. Like, that is the thing I would highly recommend. So yeah, so first thing is really knowing what you want to do. I would also really strongly advise getting rid of timelines. This, if you are serious about being competitive, it takes as long as it takes to be competitive. Like, I'm trying to think about how to say this. This, like, people screw this up in sort of one of two ways. So one way is they're like, oh, my application, I need to be done with the LSAT by October because you can't apply later than October because there's people on the internet saying that. That is somewhat true for top 20 programs. Top 20 programs, they do penalize you if you are after October. That is not true at all the farther you go down the list. And again, schools like Loyola, I have seen numerous people get full rides to Loyola with February, like applying in February. And there are people who are going to not get the kind of LSAT score that gets them a full ride because they think they have to have their applications done in October. So that's like one way you're messing it up, but it also cuts the other way. There's always people and again, I want to be clear, like a school like Loyola, you can apply in February. Like Tulane, that's a horrible idea. Tulane, you need to be done by Christmas. And it's like every year there are people who are applying to schools in like February, March, and April and like just completely shit canning their application because they imagine that it like that's when they want to apply and they don't get that like there are rules for it. And this is another thing. You have to treat admissions offices as used car salesmen. They're not political figures in the sense that they like hold office or anything, but they are like, what's the word I'm looking for? They are seasoned public speakers who are always on brand, and they say things that are misleading. So when they ask about, oh, when can I apply? They say, we take applications until August. One thing you have to know about admissions officers is the more people apply to their program, the better it is for them. The best case scenario is they get some like amazing student who boosts their numbers. The worst case scenario is they reject a bunch of people, which also boosts their numbers. If you are an admissions officer, you will like any admissions officer, if you ask them, will tell you, you should definitely apply to our law school. That has nothing to do with you. That has everything to do with what suits their purposes. They also are not honest about like how much a lot of the raw numbers matter. We'll get into why they matter and also like why they can't be honest about that. But yes, you should be very careful with taking admissions advice from admissions officers. They have certain things that they have to say. So yeah, so broadly speaking, I do want to be a little bit more clear on the timeline. Generally, if you're dealing with top 20 programs, you really want to be done by the end of October. You want everything submitted by the end of October. 21 to 100, you can get away with by Christmas. Outside of the top 100, you can potentially get away with February. I would not go past February. I have a terrible memory, so I don't want to bet any money on this, but I cannot remember working with someone who applied in March and got a scholarship, so yeah. I want to, so let's actually sort of break down what this process is generally going to look like. Besides LSAT prep, I would say you can start working on your application in like July and be fine. Like, depending on what you're doing for the personal statement, it might take a couple of months. It might take a couple of months to get your transcripts in. It might take a couple of months to get your letters of recommendation in. Everything else should be pretty chill. So if we just ignore the LSAT for a second, like, you can start in July and be okay. It wouldn't hurt to start earlier, but you can start in July and be okay. LSAT prep, we'll get into this when we discuss. LSAT prep might take longer. Trying to think. Oh yeah, but so I want to kind of get back into this timeline thing. I mean, you guys probably aren't going to have this problem because you're thinking about this now. I'm assuming you're like juniors or seniors or whatever. Like, yeah. But the big one actually is, I'm trying to think. The big one is like you do LSAT prep the wrong way, and then that takes longer than you expected it to. And then instead of just like doing the right thing and waiting till next year, you apply this year and then blah, 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 blah happens. I will tell you right now, there is this notion, and what kills me is like parents push this on students. There is this notion that if you like don't do something immediately after you graduate, that is in any way bad. That shit is insane, and it screws people over every year. So the first thing is like, there's a few ways, and what I'm talking about again, by the way, is someone who was like trying to apply during their senior year, but like their score's not there. So then like, maybe someone like me is talking to them being like, let's wait till next year. And then they're like, but I would just have this dead year. So first off, law schools don't care. Law schools do not care how old you are. They do not care what happened after you graduated college. We will get into why this is in like 5 minutes or something, but they don't care about any of that shit. There is no, basically from their perspective, it doesn't matter when you apply. Sometimes people think like, oh, if I take a break from school, I'll like never come back. And I would say to anyone who is thinking that way, like you are not serious about the legal profession. If any goal in life, if taking a year off would make you lose your interest in doing it, you're not interested in doing it. That's like, yeah. I will also, then sometimes they'll say to me like, but I don't know what I would do with that year, and that is not a real problem. If you don't know what to do with a year, you are a very privileged person. I'm not calling it I don't know anyone's privilege in this room, but if you are someone who doesn't know what to do with a year and that seems like a big problem for you, that is lucky. That is a lucky situation to be in where you can do whatever you want. Okay, I'm going to get into what affects admissions outcomes, and I'm going to be talking about what I would call hard and soft factors. I guess this is a term used in this industry. I think of hard factors being things that are really important, and I think of soft factors as things that are unlikely to be important. But, well, I'm trying to think of how to say this. Broadly speaking, the higher you go in the rankings, the more soft factors are likely to matter. So, just to give a hint, the biggest soft factor is the personal statement. I told you earlier Tulane gives a lot of shits about them. Loyola does not. That is not a coincidence. Broadly speaking, the better the program is, the more applicants, or not better, the higher ranked it is, the more applicants they have to choose from, and the more they can, for lack of a better term, discriminate based on arbitrary things how is your personal statement. Schools that are more lower ranked have to be, what's the word I'm looking for? They have to be a lot more specific about what they look at. And so, by the way, it's time to talk. Let me sort of be clear about how admissions works. So the number one factor determining U.S. News rankings is LSAT score. The number two factor is GPA. The way U.S. News uses LSAT score is they use your highest. Some of you might have heard me talking to someone before here. There is a notion still on the internet that it might matter, what score you have besides your highest. The admissions game is driven by U.S. News rankings. Unless a school is really, really highly ranked, they have a dean of admissions whose job it is to get their rankings up, and that is pressure on them. This is why LSAT and GPA are so important. This is not, what's the word I'm looking for? Okay, if you were trying to get a PhD in the liberal arts, they might actually read all your stuff and evaluate who you are and think about you and whether you're a good fit for the program. That is not what is going on with law school admissions for the most part until you get into the very highly ranked schools. For the most part, what is going on at most of these schools is they need high LSATs and they need high GPAs and maybe a few other things, and that is because of U.S. News rankings. They cannot say this publicly because if people found out that the entire system was run by U.S. News rankings, that would be an issue. So this is why, by the way, when you ask admissions officers, if you ask them, do you look at all the LSAT scores, they say, yes, we look at all the LSAT scores. But that is tricky language because they look at them. The decisions are based only on the highest LSAT score, which is why your attitude with the LSAT should basically be, I'm going to deal with this until I get the score I need. The LSAC has recently come out with a feature where for an extra $50, you can just cancel a score you get once it's low. If low scores mattered, that would be cheating. Like, just think about it for a second. If it mattered whether you had a low score, then the ability to erase your low score would be cheating. The reason they can do this and charge you $50 to cancel it is because it doesn't matter and doesn't do anything. That $50 option to cancel is a fundraising scheme by them, which is going very well, because I can even tell you people who do everything else that I tell them, they do not believe me when I say it really is only your highest score, but there we go. So I want to discuss hard factors, and I'm going to go, there's 5 of them, and I'm going to go from the thing you have the least amount of control over to the thing you have the most amount of control over. So number 1 is ethnicity. There is a straight up advantage to being non-white and non-Asian. If you are someone who is not in either of those categories, I would encourage you to get a 160 or above LSAT, and then the sky is the limit. Trying to think of how to say this. I don't even really want to get into the whys or hows, but if you can check boxes that are not white or Asian, do not sell yourself short. Unless you are trying to do something that doesn't require going to a good school, and then you don't need to go to a good school, so it doesn't matter. There are lots of fields of law where you do not need to go to a good school, so there's also that. Okay, the second thing, and again, I'm going from the shit you have the least control over to the most, the second thing is GPA, and the reason I say least is because usually the people I'm talking to are either done with school already or close to done. If you are already a junior or a senior, there's not that much you can do to raise your GPA. For the most part, so GPA is really important, but most people do not really understand what numbers are good or bad, for lack of a better term. If you are shooting for a top 20 program, which I just want to repeat, many of you probably don't need to do that. Most things do not require a top 20 program. But if you are shooting for that, yeah, you want at least a 3.75, a 3.8. If you are shooting for the top 100, you really just need a 3.3. I would say, here's a conversation I have once every month or so. Someone is I need law school help because my GPA is horrible. And then I'm what is it? And they're it's a 3.6, and I'm yeah, that's scholarship material at a lot of places. Yeah, outside the top 100, you definitely want at least a 2.6 maybe. I would like to return to this topic in 6 months because I have a bunch of people this cycle who have 2 3s and 2 4s, and they're going to have highest LSATs, and I want to see what happens. So I don't know that for sure, but in the past, the most, the lowest GPA I've seen get serious scholarship money is 2.6. So I'm not sure about that. Number 3, we already talked about this, when you apply. So the way it works, schools offer you a scholarship. It is never out of the kindness of their hearts. It is a negotiation tactic. As I said, these things are driven by rankings. So if you have numbers that would benefit them, they will try to entice you to go to their school. That is what a scholarship offer is. If you are applying very late in the cycle, you are like a person showing up to the negotiation saying, I am desperate. That's not a good look. So this is a big reason why you don't want to be late in the process. Okay, so when you apply. The next one I would say, where you apply. I have to tell this story because it sucks. So I was at a party and I said that Loyola gives a scholarship to anyone who gets at least a 160 on the LSAT. And this friend of mine goes, that's not true. And I'm look, this is my field, I promise you it's fucking true. And he goes, no, I had a 165 and they didn't give me any money. And I'm did you only apply to Loyola? And as soon as I said that, I felt really bad because he got this look on his face because of course he only applied to Loyola. A school is not going to give you a scholarship offer if you only applied to their school because you have to go to their school. So his decision to just not even apply to other schools cost him $200,000. That's why I say, and remember, this guy is like a genius. He like was working for NASA, and he like nonetheless cost himself $200,000 because he just didn't even know you got to apply to more schools. So I got off the phone with a client yesterday who like, she's like, can I get away with applying to 6 schools? And I'm like, probably, but I would really push it to 9. And she's like, but I'm not interested in them. And I'm like, yeah, but like, you want to look like you have options. You want to look like you have a lot of options. So, and by the way, I'll just say this. It is pretty easy to get fee waivers, like application fee waivers. If you are sitting there going like, I can't afford to apply to 15 schools, they want you to apply. Most schools will give them to you if you ask for them. So yeah, obviously, I would say anyone should be applying to at least 5 schools. Maybe, obviously, there are certain scenarios where you would want to apply to a lot more. Okay, so we're going to talk about LSAT, which I'm trying to think about how to not talk about this topic for like 78 hours. I'm going to, let me see what I can do. Okay, so trying to think about how to say this. There are different definitions of the word hard. One definition of the word hard is something that most people can't do. I would estimate that if all of us dedicated our lives to being professional ballet dancers, almost all of us would fail because most people simply do not have what it takes to do it. That is one type of hard. Another type of hard is, oh, it's a lot of work. Like, I think probably anyone who trains for a marathon could run a marathon, but that is a lot of work. And then the third one is some things are hard because it's just not obvious how you are supposed to do them. Over the last year, I lost 70 pounds. I used to be clinically obese. I don't know what that is. Anyhow, I tried like 20 different things that all failed before a different thing worked. And so that for me was incredibly, is that a fire alarm? Oh, okay. So I tried like 20 different things that all didn't work until one thing that was fairly easy, which for the record was counting calories. But the point is, it's like, it was impossible for me. I was like gaining weight for like 7 years. It was totally impossible for me until it wasn't hard anymore. So the LSAT, in terms of hardness, is almost entirely in the last 2 categories. I'm not making this up. 99% of the people I meet have what it takes to get a 160. Most of them will not do it correctly. So this is an area where the internet is the worst fucking thing ever. If you go on the internet, they will be like, look, you just have to study for 40 hours straight for like a year. If you guys get one thing from me, like, do not fucking do that. Do not do that. Listen, if you do anything on the LSAT for 20 hours and you have no improvement, what you are doing is not working. And I want to be clear, for most people, self-study doesn't work. I do not have an exact number. I would estimate it's somewhere over 80% of people cannot gain from self-study. The last 20 people who contacted me for LSAT tutoring, I was like, I'm too busy, I can't take you. And then they're like, well, can I is there anything I can do? And I'm like, find another tutor. I'll talk a little bit about how to do the prep in a second, but I just want to be really clear because what happens is people spend a year self-studying, they make no improvement, and they think they have like a learning disability. It's like, no. It's much more like flying a plane. Like, I would not try to learn how to fly a plane on my own. The LSAT is similar. So just whatever you do, if you are not improving, that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with like you're doing it in a way where it's not going to work. Obviously, I think the best way to improve on the LSAT is tutoring. That's why I offer those services. Classes can be helpful. I would say most of the classes are designed to take someone from like 150-ish to like 157-ish. That, by the way, is still worth a lot. Classes become a serious problem if you're trying to go above 160. Classes also become a problem if you are, starting from like 130s. I take people from 130s to 160s all the time, and like, they learn slow. Like it is a real fucking grind, but they can do it. And like the class is moving too fast. People say, you know what, I'm like, whatever, I'm like a broke college student, how can I afford tutoring? So first off, a lot of tutors will give discounts. I do. I think other tutors do, not all of them, but I think a lot of them do. The other thing is like, okay, if you work a 15-hour a week, if you work a $15 an hour job, that's like $150, which hopefully buys you like 1 hour of non-discounted tutoring. It might make sense to work, save up for it, and then pay it. Because remember, like, people are paying me like $2,000 or $3,000, and I'm saving them $200,000. Like, that deal is worth. Like, if someone has to work a job just to like pay for my services, it's still worth it. It is still totally worth it for them. So yeah, now, if you study on your own and it's working, that is amazing. You are a lucky person, congratulations. Definitely don't do the 40-hour a week shit. Your brain is a muscle, you can overtrain it. I do not meet anyone personally more than 3 times a week. In my experience of people who want to do it every day, they tend to get worse, not better. So yeah, I do not advise just like hitting it as hard as you can. It's much more about giving it a lot of time. Like, I would advise starting really early, maybe a year out. You might not need it. People who are doing it right, I think the most average amount of time it takes is like maybe 4 months. But most people aren't gonna do it right in the beginning. And like, you wanna not be worried about it. You want to not feel like a lot of stress about it. Okay. I'm going to talk about soft factors, and then I'm going to open this up to questions because there's probably a lot I forgot to cover. But before I get into this too much, again, outside the top 100, I would say soft factors do not matter other than not having typos. Soft factors are really a pretty big deal in the top 20 and maybe like medium-ish outside of that. So these are not things generally you should be worried too much about. Okay, letters of recommendation. Again, at most schools, they just need to see that they are there. The one big mistake I would say people make with letters of recommendation is they tend to choose recommenders based on how prestigious that person is, not what they are going to say about you. I think one of the biggest problems law school applicants have is they do not understand, like, I'm trying to think about how to say this. Like, I know none of you in this room would ever lie to your professors, but there are a lot of people who I think in college at times have to be like deceitful with their professors, and the professors don't say anything in response, and so they sort of think they can like get away with lying to adults, or maybe you lie to your parents. Like, I feel like there's a lot of college students who like get away with lying to adults, and they think like they're like incredible at lying to adults, but it's like a lot of adults just don't care, you know? Like, if a 20-year-old is like not truthful to me, I don't have time. Like, I got too much. Like, we're not gonna like have an argument about this. And the reason I say that I think they feel like they can get away with it is like there is a lot of BS that people put into their law school applications, and like all I can tell you guys is it is very obvious. Like, anything you are trying to do is very obvious. And so one of the things that people are trying to do is they're like, oh, like my dad's friend is like, you know, whatever, like the dean of this or the CEO of this or the head partner at this. Like, that looks like what it is. It looks like you are like relying on your dad's friend to get you into law school. That is not a good look. Like, if your options are like Joe Biden is your dad's best friend or your manager at McDonald's where you are a cashier, you should go with the manager at McDonald's who can actually talk about like what you did that is good or bad. So that's like number one thing with letters of recommendation that people mess up. That is about it with that. Okay, there is an optional statement that is like, why are you interested in this school? Do not write that unless it is required, and if it is required, keep it short. I want to talk about why that is there, and why you should not write that. One thing that law schools are ranked on is their yield, which is the percentage of people who are offered admission that choose to go there. So that is a thing they care about. There's something called, so there is crazy shit where if you're like applying to like Duke, which is like, I don't know, it's like 9th or 10th or some shit. If you're applying to Duke, you have a better chance with a 3.8 than a 3.9, which makes no sense. Like, why the hell would Duke reject you for having a 3.9 but accept you for having a 3.8? And it's because if you have a 3.9, they're like, oh, they're gonna choose Columbia over Duke. So like, we gotta like let you go. This is a thing that happens in the top 10 and is increasingly filtering down into some of the schools in the top 30 and 40. But anyhow, one thing schools care about is yield protection. So if you write them an essay where you really lay out the case for why you are obsessed with this school, they actually might be more likely to admit you because you might convince them that you're going to go there if you get accepted. The issue is you should be trying to get a scholarship. You should I'm trying to think about how to say this. Like 60% of the law schools in the country will scholarship people at 160 or above. And like I said, people who prepare for the LSAT correctly, y'all can get everyone in this room can get a 160. You could prepare wrong and not even get close. You could prepare wrong and not crack 145, but that's what's going on if that happens. And so, like, everyone should be shooting for a scholarship, and basically writing an essay about how in love you are with the school is like telling them, you don't need to offer me a scholarship, I'm going anyway. So none of my clients are writing these essays ever, and if they are required to, it's 2 sentences long. If your GPA sucks, do not write an addenda explaining it. The only scenario is something where you were such a good person that they are going to admire you. So, I mean, it would have to be like, my mom got cancer and I dropped out to take care of my younger siblings. That, and again, I want to be clear, the reason that's going to work for you is not because they're going to be okay with your GPA. It's because they're going to be like, okay, I have some sympathy for this person. The GPA, is based on US News giving a shit about the GPA. So whether your GPA is your fault or not, they don't ultimately care. From a law school's perspective, a 3.0 that is not a 3.0 is not even bad. A 2.5 that is 100% someone's fault and 2.5 that is 0% someone's fault is the same exact experience for them. So when you write the essay of like, oh, I used to be immature, but now I've got my shit together, you just look like you are making excuses. It is not a good look. Do not write it. Do not write it. Do not write it. Diversity statement. I'm trying to think of how to say this. I would talk to someone who does admissions consulting. I would be careful about writing this on your own. People tend to approach it the wrong way. And unfortunately, there's like a tendency at times to claim diversity when it's like, that is a very bad law. I don't want to make any statements about anyone in this room, but there are people who, from a law school perspective, would not be considered diverse in a meaningful way that are trying to write diversity statements. I would definitely, and by the way, if anyone wants to, I don't know, ask me questions about that now or in the future, I am happy to talk about that and get into a little bit more specificity with it. But I would be careful about doing that on your own. Personal statement. Okay. I'm gonna try. This is hard because I explained to people what the personal statement is kind of about, and we still have to have 3 more conversations about it. So this is not something where I'm doing the best job of explaining it, but I'm still going to try. Broadly speaking, outside the top 100, I wouldn't worry about it. If you are, if your dream is to continue at Loyola, your personal statement, it can be not very good, it's not gonna matter. If you are aiming very high, if you are aiming for a program where that thing is likely to matter, let's talk about what you wanna do. So what is happening at the more higher ranked law schools is they take your LSAT and your GPA, and then of course they factor in when you applied and some of that other stuff, and they put you into a pile. One pile is we're gonna give them a full ride. One pile is we're gonna give them a partial scholarship. One pile is we're gonna accept them, no money. One pile is we're gonna reject them. And then there's other people who don't quite fit neatly in one pile or the other, which if you are applying to enough schools, you're going to be a person who is on the edge somewhere. So For those people, they take out the personal statement and they're like, all right, let's see what we've got here. And this is like the number one opportunity to make them feel a certain way about you. And man, people fuck this up. Okay, so if you want to make someone feel a certain way about you, you have to distinguish yourself. And the way you do that is by like giving them some kind of experience, either by being interesting or somehow making an emotional connection. And there are a bunch of ways that people do this that are wrong. So I'm going to talk about the wrong ways, and then I'm going to talk more about the right ways. Number one, do not write a personal statement about how hard of a worker you are. They don't care. They don't care. And second off, if you are really a hard worker, your like GPA and your LSAT will reflect that. So like, that's not what the personal statement is for. Number two, unless they specifically say, please talk about this, do not write about why you want to go to law school. Like, that is what everyone else is writing on, and their reasons tend to be like, no offense, young and naive. Like, it's not, that I'm trying to think about how to say this. All of you are experts on yourselves, so like, write about what you are an expert on, which is you. You are not an expert on who should go to law school, like, don't take that angle. And everyone else is doing it. Number three, do not write about how you want to use your law degree to change the world. 90% of people who go to law school with the intent of changing the world like end up with too much debt and end up doing something that is not helping the world at all because they didn't do any of these things that I talked about earlier in this session. So, and law schools know that, by the way, and everyone else is writing about that. So like, when your essay is on any of those three topics, they can tell within 2 or 3 sentences, and it's not going to hurt your application. It's just like you had an opportunity to make a good impression, and like you totally got passed over. I would be very careful, and generally I would go against writing, like, for lack of a better term, an essay that is based on hoping that they pity you. Again, like, most of them are not that interesting. There are some, every now and then, there are people whose circumstances are so wild, it's like, okay, you know what, I want to help this person. But for the most part, most of the time, it ends up being very boring. Every year I have people who like survived cancer, and they're like, I want to talk about triumphing over cancer. And I'm like, let me guess. Like, so you had this moment, the doctor came in, and the doctor was like, you can fight this and maybe you'll live. And you chose to fight. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, who wouldn't? Like, who wouldn't do that in that case? Like, that's like one thing you always want to ask with this topic is like, what does this say about you? What does it say about you? And you have to think about it in terms of that is different from other people. And so like choosing to not die, I mean, I don't know that dying to cancer is a choice. I'm not trying to make any comments about that. But like, choosing to fight cancer, I think, is something most people would do. So if like that's your thing you're focusing on, it's tough. There is a tendency to try to look as professional and as dignified and as accomplished as possible. And A, it's very see-through, and B, the rest of your application like should show that. Like your resume shows what you have accomplished. Like, a lot of the essays I work on are about people taking L's, because I think it's like very, so first off, if you take an L, you learn a lesson, you know? And additionally, a lot of times those are more interesting than successes. But, geez, yeah, I don't know. I think I'd be here for 20 minutes talking about what a good personal statement is. So this is all I had prepared. I'm going to open this up to questions. Feel free to ask anything you might want to ask. Can you dive more into like the specificity for the diversity? Yeah, so there is, this was like, I don't know, my memory's terrible. 10 years ago, Tulane let in someone who had been convicted of like murdering one of their college professors. And people were like shocked because there's all these people who are like, they are like really going for like Tulane admissions, and Tulane passed them over to let in a convicted murderer, and it's like, what the hell is Tulane doing? But if you understand law school admissions, at the, what's the term I'm looking for? The higher ranked programs, like that have more of an option for who they can choose, they have the idea that the more diverse the class is, the better the experience is. And then that diversity is complicated, right? So it's like, obviously there's things that are generally considered diverse, like whatever, like ethnicity, potentially like religion, potentially, you know, sexual orientation, stuff like that. But like at some schools, like military service is considered diverse. At some schools, like poverty is considered diverse. So the diversity statement is an opportunity to sort of show that you have a different, like the thing about the murderer at Tulane is like that person is going to be the best person to have a class with on criminal law because they've literally been on trial for murder. Like that, if you think about it that way, you can see where Tulane's coming from, where it's like, oh my God, it would be pretty crazy to go to class with someone who can speak on what it was like to be on trial for murder. So like, the idea is that you have something unique to offer. The issue that I see is that so there's a couple problems. One, there's certain people who like I said, who are not particularly diverse that desperately want to claim diversity. But then there's other people who they very clearly are diverse, but they don't necessarily have the ability to talk about it. I'm trying to think of how to say this. For me, when I'm working with people, it's a very person-by-person thing. Like, we sit there and we talk about it, and we talk. It's really the essays, the personal statement, the diversity statement. This is the one area where you're way better off just being old. This is the one area where old people have an advantage. I was 24 or 25 when I applied to law school, and my personal statement was not good. And it's because I was 24. There is something that happens in your 20s where you I don't know, you learn more about what it's like to be an adult. And yeah, so it's generally when I'm working with people, I'm sort of talking about figuring out a focus and then talking to them about how they're going to talk about it. And if they have insights, then it's okay, great. This I'll put it like this. I'll just be blunt about it. You want to be offering a perspective that really reflects your journey. So I have no doubt that it is hard to be a black woman in America, but an essay that just says it's hard to be a black woman in America, this is not going to be a hit because so many people can write that essay. It has to be much more about what it means for you. Does that sort of answer it? Yeah.
Okay, would you recommend, say you get a low LSAT score, would you recommend writing it?
No, I would recommend, so here's the deal. There is no benefit, there is no downside to having a couple low LSAT scores on your record, so you can always take it wherever. And I don't know if this is true, but it sure has seemed in my experience, since COVID, people completely just throw up over the first time they take. It used to be 10 or 15% of my students would just show up the first time they were taking the LSAT and just fall apart. And now it's 80%. And I swear, I really think, I don't know, but
because of the virtual test, I'm telling you.
yeah.
100% because you're taking it online, in your.
You know that, I don't know the answer. I thought virtual would make it easier. People were excited about it. But broadly speaking, oh jeez, I feel like I got away from, what is your, remember, say your question again?
You have a low LSAT score, but you can't take it. Would you recommend?
Oh, okay, well, the only reason you couldn't take it anymore would be you'd already taken it 5 times, and I would say if you do badly 3 times, you really need to stop and do something completely different with your, I mean, honestly, okay, so first off, let's be clear. Practice tests are very reliable indicators. So like, let's imagine you're getting a 165 on a practice test. You can show up on the day of the test, freak out, and get a 145, but like you're capable of getting 165s. Like you are capable of that. There's nothing, like all the practice tests are old LSATs. So like, for a person to get a 145, like, or 130 or 135 repeatedly, like I would want to see like what the hell is going on in the practice test. And like, yeah, it's like, there's a problem because people are so scared of the LSAT. They are so scared. And the more scared you are, like the worse your decisions are. Like, and so, because that's how you get these things where people like get a 145 and then they just like dive back in, take it again, get a 145, dive back in, take it. It's like, you really want to like slow down and do something different. Someone who like got a 145, I mean, they're kind of screwed at that point. That's a serious problem, but like that should never happen. Couple times, you know, yeah. Any questions?
What books do you recommend getting for the LSAT?
Okay, so it is not, I want to be clear, there's nothing wrong with like experimenting with trying to teach yourself, but I really want to be sincere. If you try to teach yourself and it doesn't work, that has nothing to do with you. It's just like, it doesn't work for most people. There are no specific books I would recommend. I don't honestly, like the issue is like, everyone in this room could pick B on a question and they could do it for 10 different reasons. It's like you really need someone kind of standing over your shoulder being like, this is what you did wrong. Seven Sage used to have a lot of free videos on like the logic games portion. I don't know, like I think I heard something that they're like behind a paywall now. Khan Academy is garbage. I would definitely not recommend Khan Academy. But I would say the truth is like if you use a book and you seem to be getting better, great. But if you're not, then the book's probably not going to work. Yeah. Oh, there's two of you at this table. Both talk at once, so it's. You're a freshman. You're doing great. You got plenty of. Okay, so first up, number one, get a high GPA because you can't fix it if it. And to be clear, a lot of like most people don't need a high GPA for where they're going, but like you can't bring it up after it's down. So I focus on that. But yeah, so what's your? Whenever you have time, and I'll tell you why, because it's good for 5 years. So it's like, you know, in a way that's kind of beautiful because you have so much time. Like you could do it wrong for 2 years and still be ahead of the curve. Yeah, and then like I said, it's good for 5 years. So if you took it tomorrow and had a score you wanted to use, I'm gonna pretend, I don't know, let's say you're 19, you can like use that score till you're 24. Yeah. Okay, there's a couple available on the LSAC website, and then also if you want more, you can just email me. And again, like it's like Nola LSAT Tutor.com. If you like Google Nola LSAT Tutor or Will Noveck, I show up. Like I'm not hard to find. But yeah, if you need more, you can just Google me. And I do want to be clear, most people, the first practice test they take is horrible. I would really advise not taking that personally.
You said they're good for 5 years, but you can only take them 5 times?
Yeah, so I'm not the best source of information for LSAC policies, because generally anything that is Googleable, I'm like, I just go Google that. I don't want to fucking think about it. But, this reminds me of a big thing I got to talk about, which I'll talk about in a second. But the last I heard, you have 5 lifetime takes. But again, you should not be taking the test until you are doing well on practice tests. And I've never seen anyone screw it up more than twice. Let's imagine you get to a point where you are good on practice tests. You could just screw it up the first time. You could just screw it up the second time. Every time if you screwed up twice, you will be so angry by the third time, you will anger win the LSAT. I've worked with close to 1,000 people. I've never seen anyone screwed up there. I've seen a lot first 2 times. Yeah. This is the thing I forgot to talk about. It is not very hard to get extended time for the LSAT. You basically just need someone to write you a recommendation. It used to be the case that you needed to be a psychologist. Every single person this year that I worked with who had anyone write them a recommendation for it got it, so I think that has been relaxed. So if you are like worried about time at all, I don't know, find a therapist, find a psychologist, find a psychiatrist, find some mental health professional who is willing to write a letter that says you need extra time. And by the way, you can also get a paper test. You can get, you still have to have an online proctor, but if, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Oh, God. Okay, all right, I'm just gonna do a couple. Okay, number one, like, not realizing that they can get a great LSAT score. Like, I shit you not, everyone in this room could get a great LSAT score. You could do it wrong, but you could do, like, if you do it right, you'll get a great LSAT score. Number two, like, this one is huge. Okay, you have a full ride at like the 54th best school in the country, but you're going to pay full price at the 35th because you're obsessed with rankings. And like the 54th best school in the country, like 25% of their graduates do well, and the 35th, like 27% of their, like it's like you're like paying $200,000 for like a 1% increase in job. That's probably the fucking big one right there. Like there are extremely, extremely rare circumstances where it makes sense to pay to go to a school that is ranked higher, but most of the time it does not make any sense. That's probably the biggest one. And then the other one is like starting LSAT prep like too late and then just like not accepting that you did that and instead of applying next year, applying late in the current cycle. Those are the three. Those are like, that's like what's destroying everyone. Fourth is like writing your personal statement about how you are a hard worker who is dedicated to social justice and is going to use the law to save the world. Don't do that. That's number four. Okay, that's it. Those are the big ones. Yeah. So what I am telling you is I would operate under the assumption that you're going to be preparing wrong. Like a person who prepares correctly, it's probably going to take them 4 months, but it might take you like a year of doing the wrong shit. So like, okay, obviously people who work with me, I know like, okay, this person's gonna be good to go in 6 months. So like, I'm telling people like, who are working with me, like, okay, we need to start by May of like the year you're applying. But what I would do if I was in your case, and let's say you knew you wanted to avoid using a tutor because obviously whatever, it's expensive or whatever. Start now and try experimenting with shit until you find something that works. And then if you find something that works, either keep going and take the test or just remember, oh, this is how to study for the test and then like deal with it your junior year or your senior year. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
Would you say the LSAT like mostly consists of critical thinking?
Oh, I love this. This is great. Okay, great question. Okay, the LSAT is testing two things. It is testing two things. The first one is like, do you know what the question is asking? This is why the LSAT, like this is why tutoring is so important for the LSAT. Like the way I would describe it is like the GRE will ask you what is 2 times 3. And if you know that it's 6, guess what? You're like getting it right. And then the LSAT will ask you what is 2 times 3. And you'll be like, oh, 6. And you got it wrong because on the LSAT times means minus. So the correct answer was -1. And so like, a huge amount of what I'm doing is just being like, this word means this word means this word means this. Like, for example, I mean, these are just really weird ones. So like, okay, on the LSAT, 2 statements are compatible if they do not contradict each other. So like, if I said, okay, I like am really excited to be here, but like I'm kind of nervous, we might not consider those compatible. They seem like they're going in opposite directions. But on the LSAT, they don't literally physically contradict each other, so those are compatible. Or like two things that have nothing to do with each other, right? If I was like, I'm excited to be here, LeBron James is a basketball player, we wouldn't consider those compatible. On the LSAT, those are fully compatible statements because they don't contradict each other. So like, there's a bunch of shit where it's just like, you have to know the question. And then the other thing it's really testing is relationships, which is like, so, okay, this is going to be a very obvious example. But if I say, like, Tim is taller than Joe and Joe is taller than Liz, can you, like, deduce from that that Tim is taller than Liz? Like, that's a huge portion of the test. Logic games is interesting because people, like, have no, like the other people who do what I do don't even know why they are there, which I'm going to talk about right now. Logic games they give you a set of rules and then you got to, like, do some shit with them. And the whole point is being able to see how rules are the same thing as laws. Laws are rules. So it's testing your ability to see how whether you are good at interpreting rules and how they interact together. That's why like the LSAT is the only test that has those, because that's like pretty directly applicable to what's going to happen in law school. The reading comprehension on the LSAT, the biggest difference between the reading comprehension on the LSAT and every other reading comp, which by the way, the LSAT reading comp is harder. I used to teach MCAT, which is the test to get into medical school, and I would take people who were getting like perfect on the MCAT reading comp and give them LSAT, and they would get like 50%. They'd go from 100 to 50%. The big thing that differentiates the LSAT reading comp from everything else is it asked a lot of like, why are they saying this? Which is something like you are never trained to think about. So yeah, they are not just saying like, oh, what did they say? There's also like why they said it. The logical reasoning section is heavily like based on being able to critique arguments and critique someone's rationale and critique someone's reasoning. Yeah, but it's basically, a lot of it boils down to relationships and knowing the question. Any other questions?
Why don't you like Khan Academy?
So, I'm trying to think of how to say this. A shocking amount of like test prep material is actually bad. Like it's just like not right. Like literally saying things that are just like not true about how the test works. Yeah. So it's like Khan Academy has like, okay, here's the thing to understand. Like, I am not a doctor, and what I mean by that is like, if you're a doctor and you are bad at your job, you will like get sued, lose your license. Like, test prep is not like that. There is no punishment for like saying false things and like leading people. So it's like full of people saying things that are not like actually correct. So Khan Academy is just one that like is well known for that. There are a lot of others, I just don't know their names. Any questions? Okay, well, good luck with your lives. If you have any questions about admissions, feel free to reach out to me. And if you actually do want LSAT tutoring, there is a long-ass wait list, so I would like introduce yourself to me relatively soon and reserve something for way in the future. Bye. Yeah. Will, was that as boring as you thought it would be?